So thank you for joining us tonight for a virtual event with Jordan Blashek and Chris Haugh. A few Zoom housekeeping details before we get started. You are muted. You'll remain muted throughout the duration of this event. For optimal viewing, please use your Zoom view functions in the top right corner of your screen. Select speaker view so that our authors are highlighted on the screen. And please ask us questions in the chat box function of your Zoom screen. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can. We're behind the scenes monitoring the tech side, so send your questions in the chat box. And if at any time you drop off of the Zoom or experience technical difficulties, just click the link again and we will readmit you. And finally, but most importantly, please do not forget to purchase a copy of Union, a Democrat, a Republican, and a Search for Common Ground at rjjulia.com or wesleyanrjjulia.com. Those links will be in your chat box momentarily. You can click right on it and buy the book. Plus, Jordan and Chris were so gracious to sign book plates for us, so purchase the book now and receive a signed copy while supplies last. On behalf of RJ Julia and Wesleyan RJ Julia, welcome. We're so grateful for you all joining us tonight on this warm summer's evening. We appreciate your support of our virtual events and hope you'll check out the event calendar on our website and join us again. Without further ado, I will pass it off to the owner of RJ Julia and host of Just the Right Book podcast, Roxanne Coady, to introduce tonight's featured guests. Please give a warm digital virtual screen time welcome to Roxanne Coady, Jordan Blashek, and Chris Haugh. Take it away.
Thanks, Erica. Hi, everybody from RJ Julia's. Hi, everybody from Wesleyan RJ Julia's. And I think as Erica talked about, we record this for our Just the Right Book podcast, which airs every week on the LitHub platform, and you can get it from Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. So finding common ground today ain't easy. Finding reasons for optimism ain't easy either. So when I picked up Union by Jordan and Chris Haugh earlier this year, I was hooked by the subtitle, which is, Erica said, is a Democrat, a Republican, and a search for common ground. And then I was rewarded by the reading of the book. And Jordan and Chris met at Yale Law School, and seemingly that's about all they had in common. Jordan's a military veteran. He's an attorney in California. He spent 5 years in the U.S. Marines, 2 combat tours overseas, went to Stanford grad school. Chris is a writer, also from California. That'll become pertinent. Started as a speechwriter in the Obama White House, and then went to the U.S. Department of State's policy planning and was a speechwriter for the secretary then. Chris was raised by liberal activist family. Jordan's family was Republican, and he was enthusiastically defended in Jordan's high school by his sister for being a Republican. But here these guys are seemingly disconnected, but a serendipitous series of road trips found more alike about them than differences and forged a friendship that informs us all. So welcome, Chris and Jordan.
Thank you so much for having us.
So you were both introduced at law school, and you had some engaged debates. I think I had mentioned that I'm from New Haven. So your engaged debates were at the Owl Shop. I know exactly where that is, and they probably have more tables set outside now than they did when you were in law school. So I get how you got friendly and you decided on this first trip. Jordan, you were getting to your sister's wedding. Chris was going. But what happened on this, like, we're just getting across the country over 8 days, that turned it into 44 states and 20,000 miles?
Yeah, so there were two things that happened to us that I think were really important. The first was, on the road, you have time and space to have much deeper, longer conversations. And at the time, it was May 2016. The country seemed to be at each other's throats. And Chris and I, in all our conversations at the Owl Shop, found that we were always fighting. And they turned into these tit-for-tat, all-out political battles. But on the road, we could have much deeper, longer conversations. And we found them really enriching. And we certainly fought on the road too. But because we were in a car, we were always able to come back to what were the values we shared. And that was this initial moment of realization that there was something important to being on the road. And then the second thing that happened was we had an encounter with an Idaho State Trooper. And I'll let Chris tell this story, but this story also kind of kicked off this question in our minds about what was happening across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. On that first trip, there was no book intention here. There was just getting somewhere. And there was the intention of seeing the country as much as we possibly could. But while we were driving through Idaho, in fact, while I was driving through Idaho, I may have been going a little bit too fast down a straightaway. Anyone who's driven through Idaho knows that these roads are very flat, very long, no turns, it's easy to lose track. And I got pulled over. And I was terrified, I will admit. I was wearing my Berkeley Political Review shirt. I had my earrings in. My hair was a little bit shorter, but very similar in length. And I had some very bad experiences with police officers in the past. So this was worst case scenario for me. But this police officer came up to the window, asked for my ID, asked for Jordan's ID, asked for the registration. And we started telling him, well, my ID's, Chris, my ID's from DC. Jordan said, well, mine's from California. And the car is registered in New York to his grandfather, and we're in school in Connecticut. And everything about what we were telling him seemed to puzzle him. And he said, Chris, can you please get out of the car? I said, yes, although I'm starting to panic even further, while Jordan is very cool, being the Marine he is, next to me. And he brings me into his own car and he says, look, none of this makes any sense. And there's something about our entire lives to this police officer that just to him spoke of something very strange, very unexpected. And he asked me the same questions. I gave him the same answers. He eventually walked over to Jordan, asked him the same questions, got the same answers. And eventually Jordan said, I'm a Marine. I wouldn't let anything untoward happen in this car. And at that point, the police officer said, okay, if in that case, I'm going to let you guys go. But the experience of spending that time with that police officer, have our lives make almost no sense to him right off the bat. And then in turn, have his confusion make almost no sense to me and Jordan, was really sort of powerful for us. We sort of learned that there was this division between, where we're from and other parts of the country, and that we wanted to sort of plunge into the middle of that. It also kicked off a few fights about police community relations between Jordan and I, which was also part of the sort of central piece of this book, which is our own conversations and our own ability to become friends and overcome those differences.
So Chris, I was struck, I found that story in Idaho with the policeman to be riveting. And I won't spoil the mystery because he comes back up in the book, so you'll have to just all read the book. We have a new person there with making noise. Erica, I assume you can fix that. Erica?
There we go.
Okay. But it seemed to me like that encounter was ripe, as you say, Chris, for the beginning of you and Jordan having a conversation, because there you are, two white men, and plus Jordan's a Marine, which seemed to me was pivotal in the outcome. So did you immediately have a conversation of how it might have been different if one of you were Black? And did you agree on whether it would be the same or different?
Almost immediately, we had that conversation. If I recall correctly, my initial reaction when we got back in the car was, at first, I'm not driving anymore, and we switched seats. And then my second reaction was, my God, he was so reasonable, which to me in 2016 was something of a surprise. And to Jordan, it was not. He said, of course he was. You know, if you are measured, if you're polite, if you respect the authority of the police officer, you'll be fine. And that kicked off this longer conversation about, you know, what would have been different if we maybe looked different, if we were African American or minority or any sort of different label. And I think we disagreed at first, and we came around to understanding one another quite well later on. But early on, we had these fights where we sort of staked out ground. We thought we felt very, very differently, and we fought like cats and dogs about it, because those early conversations weren't necessarily about understanding. They were often about scoring points or being right. And therefore we sort of took our positions and we wouldn't budge, and we often wouldn't listen. And so that led to these big fights. And so while we were seeing many of the same things on the road, these interactions, like for example, the one with the police officer, showed us that we had work to do as a friendship, excuse me.
You know, one of the most wonderful takeaways that I had from the book is one of you, I forget which one of you made the statement, and it was, don't have a political conversation if your intention isn't to learn. So how possible is it, do you think, in the real world for people to be guided by that objective?
Well, I think it's very possible. I'm always sort of surprised by how often people engage on things like social media or with random people they've never met in these shouting matches where they're both yelling about facts and data that support their side. And every time I see it, my first thought is like, do you really think you're convincing that other person through these like shouting matches? And so I think it's actually very reasonable, but it's hard because especially with people who you're actually close with in your life, we feel very passionately about the things we believe. We feel passionately about the values we hold. And often those passions get the best of us. It's very hard to sit back and say, you know, as different emotions come up for you, that you're going to listen and let the other person speak. Our natural reaction, I think, is to weigh back in with the point that we think is right or to try to show where they're wrong. And so it is hard to overcome that tendency. And the truth is, it took Chris and I 3 years on the road to get to the point where we could sit back and we could listen to each other. And honestly, we still fight. We still get into arguments. And we have to remind ourselves. I think we write in the book at one point that, you know, often we would get angry, but then when we calm down and let our better angels kind of take hold, then we could have humility and grace for the other side. And so we're not saying that it's going to be easy, but it's something to cultivate because it's so important to get to better answers, to get to better decisions, to find areas where we can actually work together, that we're able to listen to the other side. And what Chris and I found was that it ultimately made us better. My views became stronger, more informed as a Republican. I think the same was true for Chris, by being able to have better conversations through listening rather than trying to score points.
Yeah, and what I'm going to, want to get more into is what role the media has in sort of creating flames that necessarily don't need to exist. Because the other part of the book is the people you met and what you witnessed. So, Chris, I'm going to have you talk about early in the book, on the first trip, you stop at a Phoenix Trump rally. Mm-hmm. And there's language in there that really took me aback. Describe how you describe in the book your reaction to Trump's speech.
Absolutely. I was surprised. We ended up going to this rally sort of on a whim. We ended up in the area. I saw it on Twitter. I said, Jordan, maybe we should take a look at this, really not thinking. Of course, Jordan said, that's a great idea. And I immediately started to regret it. But when we actually got there and managed to get into the rally, I was blown away as a recovering speechwriter myself, listening to these scripted languages that sounded a lot like what I might have scripted into a Democratic speech, just 8 years earlier. You know, it was a scripted language of love, unity, overcoming division. And I said as much to Jordan. You know, at the same time, while we were in that rally, Jordan and I took a look around and felt like we were being watched. And there was elements of that crowd that were quite scary to both me and Jordan. And what we were sort of starting to realize in that moment in that rally is that we were seeing things through the same pair of eyes almost, that we could agree on facts. And that was on our second road trip. So this was quite early on in this journey of ours. And that was when we really started to say, hey, maybe there's a voice here. Maybe there's something we can say. Maybe the fact that if Jordan and I can go to a Trump rally and see things the same way and interpret them in similar fashions, then there's a larger point here about how we actually can communicate. Because often if you were to say, watch the coverage of that very rally later that night, you would not have seen the same things we did. For instance, after the rally, we were out and about sort of in the area we called the brackish area, which is where all the rally goers sort of who were streaming out of the convention center met up with the protesters who were there in great numbers. And while we were walking around this area, sort of trying to understand how people were reacting to the evening, we both saw groups yelling, mainly for the cameras, but we also saw groups of people talking and having civil dialogue. And there was one group in particular, two BLM supporters talking to two rally goers about Black Lives Matter and what it means to both of their sides, and explaining, you know, how they came to the field the way they did. And that conversation ended in handshakes and a lot of nodding and walking away. And if you had watched the news that night, you would have only seen the tear gas canisters flying. You would have only heard when Trump went off message and pointed to the media, and then this massive booing ensued. You wouldn't have seen these sort of glimmers of hope, these glimmers of communication and common ground that we did. So I mean, that was the twofer of that night. It was the fact that we saw things the same way, but also that we saw this glimmer of understanding. And that's what we went out on the road to try to find from that point on.
And tell us, Jordan, about what was your observations about the audience at the rally?
Yeah, so you know, I had actually never been to a political rally before. It's just not my it's not my kind of thing. So we got inside. I would say the vast majority of the crowd was kind of blue collar, lots of tattoos, biker jackets. They're mostly middle aged. They skewed white, mostly white, and there were a few younger couples in the crowd. And for the most part, it was just a normal crowd, and they all kind of in typical political fashion are cheering for the president. They're cheering for the speakers, and there was a general aura of sort of joy and celebratoriness. But what we did see was there were a few characters that we felt were kind of prowling around the scenes that just seemed a little bit off. And there was one in particular who stood near us who just kept glancing over and looking at us with this kind of menacing glare. And so, you know, that was sort of the first feeling that there's a darker element here. And it didn't necessarily mean that the Trump crowd itself was dark. It was just there were a few characters prowling the scenes that I felt off-put by. And my military training trains me to be aware of those kind of things and to look for biometric signs that indicate a threat. And so I felt a little uncomfortable with those people around. And the same was true outside. So we get outside with the protesters and the Trump supporters. And for the most part, it's just normal people there to express their approval or disapproval of the president, to advocate for their sides. But then we saw some very dark characters. There were a bunch of people kitted up with full combat gear and assault rifles who turned out to be a anti-white supremacist militia that I was frankly a little disturbed that they had loaded weapons around so many people.
And masks, right?
And then there were elements of whether they were Antifa or other groups who they're in mass and they're ready to cause trouble. And at some point, somebody threw something at one of the riot police officers, and it breaks out into chaos. And those people were there looking for a fight. And so, you know, we saw that 90% or 95% of the people that night in the rally and outside were just normal people. And then there were 5% looking for trouble. And it was, again, something that Chris and I saw the same way, and we were able to talk about afterwards with that shared set of facts.
So Chris, you mentioned in your comments a minute ago about the cable stations or the news media were going to report on the violence or maybe the masked guys that Jordan was just referring to. Do you feel that journalism is not doing its job properly, that it is in fact adding to the divisiveness? Is it under, the bad news sells, good news doesn't?
Right. The if it bleeds, it leads mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer is yes, but I have a lot of love for the journalism community. I consider
know you
myself
do.
a journalist. Yeah. I trained in it. The background on my phone for years was Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein going over a draft during their Watergate reporting. What I'll say is that we have a very diverse press, almost by design. And there are amazing people in the press currently doing great work, who are digging deep, who are finding amazing stories. And I would encourage us all to try to listen to them more than anyone else. But what I think is happening is that the majority of our media diets are being consumed by a different kind of journalism, a little more aggressive, less thoughtful form. As a result, it's creating this crisis in our media diets. I think that the Trump rally was a perfect example. The headlines are important. You need to know that violence broke out. You need to know that Trump went off script partway through that rally and started talking about something other than that message of unity. But it's also very important that we bring back stories that aren't just that, if there are other stories going on. And I worry that depth of reporting, that sort of second level, third level reporting is just not happening. We spoke to someone recently who worked inside a newspaper for decades, ran a newspaper, a large one, who said negative stories outperform good stories 8-1 or right around there. And so there's these negative incentives in our media that lead to those headlines, that lead to that kind of reporting, and that sort of lead away from the longer material, the material that speaks to a more complex picture than, say, one side, another side clash. And I think that's where we're sort of losing our way. And, I have to start a clock on myself every time I talk about journalism, because I could talk about it for days. But what I would say is that we need to double down on the sort of ethics and professional techniques of the profession that made it great. But we also need to adapt to this new era, because I think between technology, between our political language, between the way this country is changing, we just haven't been able to adapt so far, and that needs to change.
Yeah. And Chris, I think we lost the last part of your.
Oh, uh-oh. How about
Well,
now?
I think we mostly got it, but Jordan and Chris, to me, this role of journalism, I'm not, I was an accounting major and a finance major, so I don't come from that, but I have begun to feel that journalism is the key to our moving into a place of more unity and optimism. But what do you think are the key things that any of us can do as like normal, seemingly powerless individuals can do to make sure that that's the direction we're going in?
Yeah, I think that I think there's two things people could do as individuals. One, I think people can take a little bit more control of what they're getting. So yeah. I always think about social media as something we almost just kind of do passively. It's like, well, I follow a bunch of people, I get what comes through the algorithms, and I just read it. And as a result, the algorithms are optimized to promote outrage and anger, because that's what drives engagement. But we can make decisions to curate social media in a way that feeds positivity. Mm-hmm. So in the same way that people have started adopting mindfulness or better diets with food, we can do the same with our news and our social media, so that we're getting fed things that are more bipartisan and more less divisive, more positive. I think the second thing is to vote with our wallets. And there are news outlets out there that are trying really hard to break through, to provide kind of views that come from all sides, or to lift up positive stories. And people can vote with their wallets and give money to those organizations, recognizing that in order for those groups to thrive in a competitive market, we have to pay for it. They're responsive to consumer demand, and the bigger outlets are as well. So I think those two things could help.
All right, I think that's great, Jordan. So speaking of the media, one of the stories I loved, I mean, there were lots of people I enjoyed meeting in the book, but one that I thought epitomized how we silo images and decide what somebody is about is Pete the truck driver. So I'd like to hear each of you share a piece of who you thought Peter was and who Peter really was.
Yeah, I can get started. You know, we decided after the Trump rally to try to find stories that spoke to larger values, that spoke to ideas that Jordan and I could agree upon. And so we started to look wider than politics. And I love Studs Terkel and his book, Working. And I had read one of his interviews with a truck driver from, I think, the 70s. And decided that this was a profession that I wanted to spend time with. I mean, this was the thing about Union. We decided to do stories based on ideas we wanted to pursue, or just stories we're curious about, and larger values. But sometimes it was just simply, Studs Terkel is great, let's go try to walk in his footsteps. And through a series of events, we found Pete, and we met him in Las Vegas. And we went to this place called Morton's Truck Stop, and we were looking for him. And we hear this big truck honk, and we turn around, and there's Pete, and he opens his arms, and he's got a "Make America Great Again" shirt on. And of course, you know, we were trying to get away from politics at this point, and both of our first thoughts was, apparently that's impossible in 2017. But we got in the truck with Pete. We started driving on our way to Slidell, Louisiana, to drop off a house worth of goods, and he started to explain his politics. And one of the first things he mentioned was he wished the president would talk more about climate change. And then from there, we kept talking about the president, and not just about climate change. He also mentioned that his faith led him to believe that God is love, and therefore he had to support LGBTQ marriage in a way that he hadn't necessarily before. And so here was this guy who wore a "Make America Great Again" shirt for 4 out of the 5 days we were with him, but who had all these complex beliefs and all these complex political thoughts. And so that was very eye-opening for me. I had never spent that much time with a Trump voter or someone so unabashedly supportive of the president. And what I found is that I could not put my finger on exactly what he believed or what he thought. And that was really powerful for me. But Jordan came at it from a very different perspective than I did.
I did, but I would say my takeaways were largely the same. You know, I was excited to go along with Pete because I thought in some sense that he would reflect similar values to a lot of the Marines I served with, have this kind of deep love for America, but also these kind of complex views that just arise from their own interpretation of the news and their life experiences. And I expected to find that. I also expected to find someone who was kind of tough and gruff and fast talking, but had this kind of ruggedness to him. And I think I was genuinely surprised by how emotional and sensitive Pete was. And he broke down crying half a dozen times over the course of 3 days. And every time it was over some family member that he deeply loved, or some part of his past that just aroused strong emotions in him. And he was this sensitive, unbelievably kind soul. And I think Chris and I were just very fortunate. We felt very fortunate that we got to spend so much time and meet someone like that, who we would never have crossed paths with otherwise.
So Jordan, how do you think someone who is complex like that, do they feel that Trump has responded to what they hoped for? Do they feel disappointed in Trump? Do they think there's not really a person that represents the complexity of their points of view, so Trump comes closest? I mean, how does that person of that kind of complexity now view Trump 3 years in, do you think?
Yeah, well, so first, I think everybody is that complex. We as people are complex and nuanced, and we have experiences that apply the filters we look at the world through. And I think that's true for everyone. When it comes to the president, again, it's hard to generalize across
Yeah, of course.
people, but I
But
think
I'm going to make you do it.
if I must, I would say that the people who voted for him knowing his flaws. Like his flaws were there for everybody to see, and he didn't hide those. Everybody knew his past in New York City. They knew how he was with his previous marriages. Like these things weren't a secret.
Yeah.
And so what they respond to are not those flaws. They're to the virtues that they see. And for Pete, what Pete said about the president was he doesn't give a damn about anything, and he really meant it as a compliment. Meaning like he's not going to be politically correct. He's not going to do things because everybody expects him to do it, and so he is his own man. And that was important to Pete. And I think that's true for a lot of Trump's supporters, where what they were really responding to were 3 decades of politicians in their minds who came, made promises, did a bunch of things in office that ultimately either hurt them or didn't benefit them. And then they leave office and they're in these elite circles and they go off and get wealthy. And there's this palpable anger, I think, in 2016 that led to Trump's victory, where people were rejecting that form of politics. And while I think, like every president, Trump has done some things they like, he's probably done some things they don't like. Maybe he lived up to some expectations and not others. I think this support he still holds from that population still comes from the fact that they feel like he's different. He's not a normal politician, and they feel that he really does care about their interests and is fighting for them. I think it's one of the things I felt when I was at the Trump rally, that when you're there in person, you really see the connection he has to his supporters, and you can feel that there is this love that flows back and forth between them, which is hard to tell if you're not there in person. You can't get it just by watching him on TV, but in person, it's really there. And so that's what they're responding to.
And the writing describing that speech really caught my attention. I think whichever one of you wrote that, we can talk about how you write a book together. It delivered on that observation you just made, Jordan. Because that isn't necessarily, I'm a Democrat. That isn't necessarily what I think of Trump. And so reading that, I thought, okay, that's sort of like changing the kaleidoscope of how Trump supporters see Trump in a different way than I might see Trump. I mean, I think the question will be, and it'd be hard for you to know, having been out on the road a few years ago, is whether they have buyer's remorse now, seeing the state that we're in, whether that changes their view or not. I mean, I guess we'll know in November.
Yeah, I think so. And it gets back to the point about the media, which is we have such different news diets that, on the right, I think they're mostly getting information that says on issue after issue, Trump is delivering for them, whether it's, jobs or executive orders on various things that they care about, or immigration or trade deals or whatever. They're getting fed information that he's delivering all these things. And then on the other side, there's almost nonstop coverage of all the things that he's doing wrong and all the consequences of his presidency and all the scandals. And so it's really two different worlds we're living in. We're almost watching 2 different movies. And what'll be interesting to see on November 3rd is which movie carries the day with more people.
Yeah. So I want to go back. You both met at Yale Law School. I'm telling you that as if you didn't know, but you might have forgotten. So I want to bring us back to a topic about the little topic of the Constitution, because in many ways, for most of U.S. history, the Constitution has stood for a common vision that we had as a country. And I was going to say that we seem to have as a country, but I think we actually did have as a country. And now there's a lot of observation that we no longer really share a vision. We no longer have a unified sense of what it is America's about. After 3 years of meeting people, what's your view of, do we have an American vision? Is there a unified vision? Is the American dream just like, 300 million different versions of an American dream?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a historical answer, a philosophical answer, and then our journalistic answer from the road. I think the historical answer is the idea that we've ever had a unified vision of the country, I think is actually just wrong. From the day the Constitution was signed, we broke into factions that had very different views of whether America should stay this agrarian state, sort of the Jefferson-Madisonian view, or whether it should be a industrial powerhouse, which was the Hamiltonian view. And from that day on, we've always had very different visions. The important thing is that we engage around the Constitution in order to argue for our vision. And that is the real magic of the Constitution, is that it creates a framework for governance and to have these debates about which direction we should go. And no matter what side you come at it from, as long as you're wrestling over the idea of America and the Constitution itself, you're engaging in that common project. I think the philosophical answer is tied to that, which is, every generation has the right and ability to interpret the Constitution, to argue for what it means. And we've seen over our long history all these different philosophies for what the Constitution means or how to interpret it. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. And we're still doing that today. So all these debates we have over things like Black Lives Matter or police brutality, issues of citizenship and borders, all of these are still in the context of different theories of constitutional interpretation that we're wrestling over. And Chris and I think, find that very inspiring. And then to the last question of what we saw on the road, Chris, as the journalist, will have a much better answer than me. But I think we saw everywhere we went that everybody we talked to was worried about what was pulling us apart and felt deeply about the future of the country. And those two things speak to this shared future that we still have together. But I would love to hear what Chris says about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with everything Jordan just said, which is a fun statement
That's
to make.
That's fun.
After 3 years of fighting. But no, I mean, I would just reiterate that, both of us very early on, and I think we wrote about this in the book, believe that America is an experiment. And that means that we constantly have to renew it. We constantly have to fight for it. I was just re-listening to Barack Obama's eulogy for John Lewis and Representative John Lewis, and he says, we have to redeem the original ideas of this country. And I think that is true across the board. And we share this values language. We share this sort of fundamental belief in the words of our Constitution and the words of the preamble in particular. And it's just a constant effort to find the way to live up to them more fully. And we often get it wrong. And this is something that Jordan and I talk a lot about. And it's actually why we're so hopeful, is that that spirit of experimentation, of entrepreneurial politics still exists all around this country, even if it's not living in the headlines or living in our politics right now. That is what we saw on the road, is people willing to fight for those values, willing to fight to try to make that Constitution more real by the day. And yeah, so we're very hopeful, excited for the future of the United States, even though we're in this moment of great tragedy.
And Jordan and Chris, do you think you ended this trip more optimistic than you were starting out, or reinforced optimism you had?
Well, there's a complicated answer to that, which is, well, maybe not all that complicated. Jordan was more optimistic than I was to start this project. He thought we'd find signs of America's goodness everywhere we went, whereas I was far more skeptical. Indeed. But sorry, apologies, but I was far more skeptical. I couldn't help but read the news that I trust and see all of these problems that we're facing, whether it's the various forms of inequality, the opioid epidemic. I mean, there were serious problems that we were facing. And across, fast forward to the end of these journeys, and I think both of us feel that we were in part right and in part incorrect, which is to say that these issues that I was so worried about, we saw everywhere we went. I mean, it was impossible not to face addiction, the broken criminal justice system, issues of racial inequality. But we also found these amazing people who are fighting to try to not just work on the values within the Constitution, but in their own lives, make for a better America, make for a better neighborhood, make for a better community. And it was those people that made me optimistic. I came around to Jordan's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we use the word hope, though, because we believe that hope is an active form of optimism.
This feels like a big pivot, but one of the most touching scenes in the book to me was, Jordan, you talking about taking the Marine oath. And I'd like you to spend a minute talking about that, but I'd like you to add that a conversation about the loss that we have of those kinds of rites of passage, and what price are we paying for those rites of passage being less frequent?
Yeah, it's a great question. That is one of my favorite parts of the book as well. I think Chris and I probably spent more time on that chapter than any other. And
it's a gorgeous chapter.
Thank you. And the context is we were in Arizona at a gun range, and the guys who worked the gun range turned out to be veterans. 2 of them were Marines, and they were enlisting one of their nephews, into the Army that night, and they invited Chris and I to come back for it. And the oath of enlistment, where a young man or woman takes the oath to join the U.S. military, to me is one of the more inspiring things in American life. And the reason I feel that way is for most of our young lives, and I think for most people generally, we make very few commitments in life that fundamentally change you. And I think there are obvious ones, like a commitment to a partner for marriage, but it's pretty rare. And so to see someone at 17, 18 years old willingly take on this commitment to serve their country, to go through a process that will change them from a citizen into a soldier is very awe-inspiring. And it's part of the reason I feel so strongly that this country is decent and good, because any country that can inspire millions of young men and women to take that oath and then to serve overseas in the line of danger in order to protect this country, it has to be good. And America has been very active around the world since we created an all-volunteer military, and yet people still step forward to do that. And for me, when I took the same oath, it's slightly different for officers, but I took that on December 11th, 2009. And I had my family around me. I had all the Marines I trained with. And it really felt like this turning point in my life, where I went from someone who mostly cared about myself and, of course, my friends and family, to a person who had a duty and obligation to protect other lives and to uphold the Constitution. And it definitely forever changed my perspective in the way I approach things. And so I think that's the power of rites of passage, or rituals that carry some kind of sacred commitment. And we don't have that many in American life. And I think they provide this deep well of social capital and form the basis for strong communities. And so I wish we did have more of them, because they really are this transformative thing for a person and for a community.
Does it make you feel enthusiastic and a proponent for the notion of everybody turning 18 and having service of some kind, whether it's military or otherwise?
Yeah, I am a proponent of it. I don't believe in enforced service, so I wouldn't be in favor of mandatory national service, but I think we could provide a lot of incentives and opportunities for people to do it. And if we created a culture where it was expected that when you hit 17, 18 years old, you're going to spend a year or two devoting yourself to the service of others, I think that would be an incredible thing for this country. I think it would It would bridge a lot of divides that we see across socioeconomic and racial lines. And I think it would train people at an early age to think about giving to others, not just about
Right.
liberties they themselves have.
So before we get to a question from the audience, I'd like to have my last question be, you guys started out friendly and maybe friends of a male Yale Law School type, but at the end of these years, there's a palpable friendship that's obvious in the writing of the book. So what made that happen? What about this trip made that happen?
Well, for one, we were forced to get to know.
You could also come out enemies after being forced to be together, Chris.
It's all for show. It's just
It's all, yeah, exactly. No. But we were forced together, which means we learned to communicate. And on these long road trips, you get in a fight. You think the other person doesn't believe the same things that you do, and it's uncomfortable and it's painful. And then you're still 100 or 200 miles outside Reno. Or you're still, 200 miles outside of the nearest town.
That was an ugly fight in Nevada. It
certainly was. Which is why it comes to mind. But but you go through this maturation process, or this grieving process almost, where you kind of come to understand, like, maybe I shouldn't have said this, or maybe they've got a point on that, or simply I care about this relationship and I want to work on it, even if we haven't come to any sort of conclusion here. So for one, it was just we learned to communicate. We were forced to learn to communicate, and I think that's a really powerful lesson, to just keep coming back to the table, even if you don't necessarily believe that the other person has heard you, or that you're going to break through on that next convo. Maybe it's going to take 3 or 4. Just keep coming back, and that's really been powerful for the two of us. But we also, we were both lucky to have a faithful negotiator in these things. Jordan wanted to be friends with me. I wanted to be friends with him. It was palpable.
Yeah.
And so there's this great sum of grace, I think, to good friendship. And I don't know, where that comes from, but we were very fortunate to find it when we did. And, my girlfriend makes fun of me all the time, because whenever I'm on the phone with Jordan, I sign off with, "I love you, man." Because I do think that expressing it and saying how much you care about friendship and putting it at the heart of saying that I want to work on this, I care about this relationship, is the stuff of any great relationship, whether it's a friendship, a romantic relationship, a professional one.
Jordan?
Yeah, I think great relationships and friendships are built on shared experiences and shared emotions. And on the road, Chris and I had endless amounts of both. We went through different things together that we could always look back on when things got hard or we got into fights. We could look back on those experiences and marvel at how much we had come to do and know about the other. And then we had a lot of shared emotions. It's when you get into a fight and go through the reconciliation process, it requires a certain amount of vulnerability. And when you spend important life moments together, like celebrating birthdays or going through breakups where the other person's there for you, you're exposing all these emotions that we rarely do with other people. And I think those were the things that built this strong friendship that, today Chris is my best friend. He'll be the best man at my wedding, hopefully someday, my mom someday. And those are the things that I think have led to this great friendship.
Well, and Jordan and Chris, the thing that I loved reading about, and I think is a reminder, and to not go down too stereotypical a road, but men don't always seem willing to be vulnerable, and it's inspiring to read about allowing that to happen has a reward. That I loved reading about that, and I hope lots of people read it. And I mean, there's a ton to take away from the book, but watching the two of you become friends by fighting, and letting yourselves get heated and open and vulnerable was pretty cool. So thank you both for that. So we have a couple of questions here. And Chris, you touched on this earlier, but understanding the divisive role the media plays in politics from both sides, where do you go now for news? Just news, not opinions, not op-eds. Are there any nonpartisan news outlets anymore?
Yeah, I would say yes. I don't know. Jordan might disagree with me on this. I mean, one thing I wanted to say earlier about what Jordan was saying about voting with our wallets is local news is dying in this country, and local news is usually the keeper of the objective news philosophy. And watching newsrooms get hollowed out across this country is really disappointing, because I think national newspapers are more subject to the machinations of national politics, whereas the local newspapers, whether it's a tiny place up in, say, like Leland, Michigan, where I like to spend time, or whether it's a San Francisco Chronicle, I think those are the places where you'll find a majority of the just bootstrap, just tell it how it is reporting in this country. I would also just encourage people to look at websites like The Factual and others that try to say, okay, what you're reading right now is a moderate left or a moderate right perspective or a publication. But that doesn't mean it's not helpful, and that doesn't mean it's not going to give you good information. And when you know the sort of overall bias of a publication, then you're far more likely to be able to pick out what is essential about it, what you need as a citizen and as a voter, and factor out what isn't. And so if we support places that are local, and we support places that are trying to identify bias and voice up front and being honest about it, I think that's the best way to fight the worst tendencies of our media.
Chris,
Oh,
Chris, you froze.
oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, there you're back. Chris, one of the things that is striking to me is the irony that from surveys I've seen, people trust their local news more than they trust their national news. But the local news papers, like I have a friend who owns the Keene Sentinel, they're the ones in financial peril.
Yeah. That is the terrible irony of this, is that people love their local news but won't pay for them. And I think we see that happen all over our media. I don't think that means that they are dying. I think that means that we need to change the business
model. The model will change.
Yes, indeed. And I think that if we have good people fighting for that new model, then we can actually preserve these institutions.
Yeah. The other question that we've got is, well, Jordan, I ought to let you answer it for balancing this out in case you think it's worse than Chris does.
Well, I just have a different approach than Chris. So I like going to Real Clear Politics. They aggregate headlines and op-eds from the day. And I try to read from both sides, knowing what I'm getting. So I know if I'm reading National Review that it's from a kind of center right. If I know if it's something from the Huffington Post, it's going to be center left. And so I like knowing the source and just triangulating from both sides.
Yeah. I'm with you, Jordan. So I read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times every morning. And my favorite is to find a story about the same topic and try to compare what they're each saying about the same facts. So, and then the last question is, where are you coming to us from tonight? And what are your plans after you're finished with your virtual book tour?
Great question. So I'm in Manhattan at the moment. I have my day job here. So I work for this company called Schmidt Futures that was founded by Google CEO Eric Schmidt, which has as the mission to try to solve the world's biggest problems using talent and technology. So I'm going back to my day job, and I'll be doing that for the next little bit.
Yeah, and I'm coming to you from Southern California, where I'm being far more frivolous than Jordan, and I'm surfing.
Nice.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, you need to, unwind after all of this. And what's coming next for me is I'm going to keep writing, and maybe I'm going to entice Jordan into keep, writing again with me. So that's what's next for me.
All right, great. So the last, I'll let one of our participants have the last comment here. He or she said, they bought your book because one of my dearest friends is a Trumper. Thank you for a good few pointers to communicate with her better. So hopefully there's gazillion people out there, Chris and Jordan, who are going to give somebody with whom they vehemently disagree a different perspective in a conversation. And I'll repeat it again because I loved it, that if you're going to have a political conversation, as Jordan and Chris say, your objective should be to learn, not win. So
Exactly.
Jordan and Chris, thank you so much. Thank you for writing the book. Thanks for all of you who joined us. We have been talking with Jordan Blashek and Christopher Haugh, the authors of Union, a Democrat, a Republican, and a Search for Common Ground. Next, when the book comes out in paper, guys, hopefully I'll see you in New Haven.
Yes, please.
You will be there.
All right, be well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roxanne.